Hello again, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Monday, the 29th of August. I'm Andrew Wilson, and this is Scotland at 7. This evening, I have the latest daily update from Ukraine on day 187 of the illegal Russian war of aggression. Then I'll introduce this evening's guest, and then together we will look at today's headlines from Scotland and around the world. Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukraine's president, held a secret meeting with representatives of Ukraine's defence and security sectors yesterday. The meeting was attended by the heads of the armed forces, intelligence agencies, the Ministry of Defence, the Ministry of Internal Affairs, the Ukrainian security services, as well as other defence forces. Russian artillery fired at Ukrainian towns across the river from the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, local officials said yesterday. The UN nuclear watchdog is still waiting for clearance for its officials to visit the plant to help stabilise the nuclear safety and security situation there. Concerns about the potential risk of radiation leaks at the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant persist. Ukraine's state energy operator warned that there are risks of hydrogen leakage and sputtering of radioactive substances. Russia has ignored widespread international calls for the area to be demilitarized. Ukrainians are likely to experience their coldest winter in decades, its gas chief has said, as the thermostats on its Soviet-era centralized heating systems are to be set for indoor temperatures between 17 and 18 degrees Celsius. That's about 4 degrees lower than normal. Germany is replenishing its gas stocks more quickly than expected, despite drastic Russian supply cuts, and should meet an October target early, following massive purchases of gas from other suppliers. And EU foreign ministers are expected to suspend Russian tourist visa facilitation next week. The EU move falls short of an outright ban, but would make getting travel documents significantly more complex and expensive. Now, I'm delighted that we are joined this evening by Paul McLennan, MSP. Paul has been the MSP for East Lothian since 2021. Previously, he served as a local councillor for the Dunbar and East Linton multi-member ward of East Lothian Council and was both the SNP group leader and then the council leader from 2007 to 2012. Paul has also been a board member of NHS Lothian, the regional offices of Scottish Enterprise and the Commission on School Reform. Paul, good evening. How are you keeping?
Yeah, Andrew, last week off recess before we go back to Parliament next week, so trying to fit in as much as we possibly can this week. But looking forward to going back.
Good. Well, that's good to hear it. Our young folks go back to school and then our MSPs follow suit. So I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah,
But yes, I can imagine you'll
yeah,
have a very busy week this week.
yeah.
Now, our first story this evening is that skyrocketing energy prices mean almost 1 in 4 adults in the UK will not switch on their heating at all this winter. That's according to a poll, with opposition MPs describing the findings as a national scandal. The survey of more than 2,000 UK adults found that 23% would do without heating over the winter months. That figure was even higher for parents with children under the age of 18, with 27% of them saying that they would be forced to leave the radiators cold. About 70% said that they would turn their heating on less, while 11% said that they were considering taking out a loan to cover the extra costs. That figure rose to 17% for those who have children. The poll was conducted before the regulator Ofgem announced the energy price cap would increase by 80% from October. The decision will take the average gas and electricity bill from £1,971 a year to £3,549 a year. The SNP Shadow Chancellor Alison Thewlis MP criticised both Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss for failing to come up with a proper plan to help people through the cost of living crisis several weeks into the Tory leadership contest, and she has demanded action now. Commenting, she said, we are now several weeks into a Tory leadership contest, and still neither candidate has put forward a real plan to support people through the cost of living crisis. And the current PM is missing in action. Truss and Sunak are living in fantasy land, she continued, with their tax promises, or they are knowingly misleading the public on how effective they will be. Either way, their actions, or lack of, are dangerous for the millions who are struggling to make ends meet in this cost of living crisis. Households and businesses need the Westminster government to get a grip, she said, and use its reserve powers to take immediate and radical action to support them with record high energy bills. That means reversing the energy price cap rise and recalling Parliament immediately to deliver an emergency budget that provides the support people need, and that includes scrapping VAT on fuel, doubling support for households, and introducing an energy price cap and grants for businesses. So, Paul, firstly, as ever, this was a UK survey of about 2,000 people, and we don't know what the geographic spread amongst those surveyed was. We also know that the impact of the energy price crisis will be disproportionately felt in Scotland, where the weather is colder and wetter, and many more homes are not on the gas grid or rely on heating oil, the price for which is completely uncapped. So, do you think is this survey underplaying the problems ahead?
It probably is in Scotland, Andrew. And our caseload now is predominantly the cost of living crisis, and in particular, and about fuel costs, energy costs, and this is a real worry in terms of that. So I think it's been underplayed. I know there was another survey last week which estimated around about, I think it was around about 72.8% of people in Scotland would be in fuel poverty. Now, the population of East Lothian is roughly about 100,000. That's 70 to 75,000 people will be in fuel poverty within a matter of months. That's a scary figure, so I think it has been underestimated. And as you said, I think because we've got a colder climate, that figure just been mentioned will be higher in Scotland, and it's a really scary prospect.
Thanks, Paul. No, absolutely. It was that 72% figure that I had in mind when I was thinking about that question. Now, it was the
Yeah.
Liberal Democrats who commissioned this survey, and they have called for further commitments by the incoming Tory Prime Minister, expected to be Liz Truss, to help struggling households. They've called for a further windfall tax on oil and gas companies to partly fund a freeze on the price cap. Not that the price cap is operating as a cap anymore. But does that limited set of requests, does that go anywhere near close enough to what is going to have to happen? Alison Thewlis is proposing instead reversing the energy price cap rise and recalling Parliament for an emergency budget that provides support to people, scraps VAT on fuel, doubles support for households, introduces an energy price cap and grants for businesses.
Yeah, I would agree with all that Alison's proposed, and the one key thing is obviously we're discussing this within the context of devolution. If Scotland was independent, we wouldn't be having this discussion. We would be looking at how quickly Scotland could deal with this, and we just have to look at other examples in other countries. The rise in the UK is by far the highest in any parts of Europe, and here we are in Scotland producing one of the biggest energy producers in Europe. It's a ridiculous situation to be in. You just have to look at France. France nationalised their part of EDF, and their price cap rise is in about 4 to 5%. In the UK, it could be over 200 odd percent, and we're hearing bills next April could be up to as high as £7,000, and people won't be able to pay that. It's not a case of not wanting it; they won't be able to pay it. So yeah, I think it's very limited. At the very least, we should be reversing the energy cap increase now, and then obviously looking at a longer, medium and longer term issues. But we should be reversing that now. People are going to die. That's the fact about this. People will die because of this. Make no mistake about it. We can't be in that situation. We're actually in the situation, Andrew. We're speaking to organisations throughout East Lothian about heat banks, heat refuges. So we're looking in 2022. We're actually in discussions with organisations around about how we can keep buildings open to make sure people get a heat during the day. It's a ridiculous situation to be in, but this is a policy decision by the UK government. Make no mistake, it's a policy decision. I know there are outside factors, but other governments have picked this up and are looking after their most vulnerable people. The UK government has been silent on it, whether it's Rishi Sunak, Liz Truss, or Boris Johnson. They are completely silent on the issue and have been posted missing.
That's a very good point, Paul. In terms of the price rises, yes, Jack Monroe, the activist, was tweeting yesterday, I think, that she's calculated the likely increase in the price gap as being something like 321% in the year. But
Yeah.
you were ahead of my final question on this topic, which was that experience of recent Tory governments has been that they act too late and they do far too little. And I would argue that the more than 200,000 who died during the pandemic are incontrovertible evidence and testament to that approach from the Tory government. So you were saying that people will die. How many do you think the Tory government will allow to starve or freeze or both before they wake up and do something?
I think we've seen the Tory party debate, and I watched the recent one in Perth. And you actually seen Rishi Sunak, he was talking about, the welfare and looking after the most vulnerable. And he actually highlighted at that time the focus should be on tax cuts, not on supporting the most vulnerable. I couldn't believe when he said that, but there you go. Liz Truss was asked in it and was asked, and I think at that stage Colin Mackay did say that people would die, and she said that she would need to wait until the new chancellor came in and dealt with the issue. Then we are weeks away, weeks from the increase. I think I've not seen estimates around how many people will die. That happens naturally normally during the winter times anyway. People die. I would take to think in the number of people that will die this year because they can't afford to heat. Now, 25% of people, in Scotland, you're talking about millions of people, hundreds of thousands, millions of people who won't be putting their heating on. That's a scary, scary prospect. We can't allow that to happen. We just can't.
Certainly, Paul. So much more needs to be done, so much more quickly in order to address the imminent crisis. But let's move on to our next story now this evening, because a new pay offer, which would have seen all local government workers receive at least £1,925, with some earning £20,000 receiving an additional £2,000, that's the cash equivalent of 10%, and everyone earning below £39,000 would receive a cash increase of the equivalent of more than 5%, and only those earning more than £39,000 a year would receive 5%. The Scottish Government has provided a further £100 million to local government for 2022-23 to support the cost of living payments, which are being offered as part of the pay negotiations. This support will continue into 23-24 and is in addition to the £140 million of additional recurring funding already committed by the Scottish Government to support the pay deal. Unite has rejected the new offer, and Unison has said that they will put it to their members but recommend that it is rejected. Both unions have said that the refuse workers' strikes will continue, although the first round of strikes will end this week as scheduled. The GMB Scotland is continuing to discuss the new pay offer with COSLA. Commenting, the Deputy First Minister, John Swinney MSP, said, "Intensive discussions between trades unions and COSLA over recent days has led to a revised pay offer being made." He went on, "No deal is perfect, and I wish we could go further, but this deal does offer significant increases for those on low pay. We must now respect the democratic trade union processes underway, while we hope that members decide to accept the offer." Now, Paul, Keir Greenaway, who's the GMB's senior organiser for public services in Scotland, said GMB members are clear that they are not prepared to accept working poverty as an inevitability, and their strike actions are a direct response to the failure of political leaders to realise this. Now, without being too contrary, I would argue that those on the lowest pay who are members of GMB working for local authorities, they've been accepting working poverty to an extent for the last dozen years during Tory austerity. So what's different now?
I think we're obviously in a much different political position than we have been for a number of years. I mean, inflation we heard last week could rise to 17%. We obviously have the cost of living crisis that's on us as well. So I think that's the wider context that's there, and so I think that's part of the issue. I think we've got to respect, as John Swinney said, the democratic right of the union members to make their mind up on that. I think it's a very reasonable a deal. I think if you're talking about a 10% equivalent of 10% increase for those on lower salaries, I think that's a reasonable salary to look at. Yes, we've got to look around about the cost of living, but one of the biggest constraints that the Scottish Government has, obviously, it works within a fixed budget. So if there's money being taken to give to COSLA and employers, then obviously that has to be found elsewhere. And that's not in any way looking at the cause of council workers. I think they have to be supported in terms of that. One of the biggest issues, of course, that the Scottish Government can't borrow. to fund that. It's already spoken to the UK government around about additional funding to look at that, because when we look at some of the issues, inflation at 17% is the highest rate in the whole of the UK. That's the highest rate in the whole of the G20. So, in terms of policy management, the UK government have got this fundamentally wrong, and inflation is running out of control. Now, as I said, it's the highest in the G20. So, we have to look at the position in terms of, if we need to find the monies, it has to come from elsewhere. Where do we find it? And that's the role of government. Of course it is. But in terms of respect for the devolved nations, the UK government should be looking to support the devolved countries in terms of the additional pay rises that are required because of their policy mistakes, or at least give the ability to the Scottish government to borrow, to go out and do that, and being able to fund that over a certain period of time. So it's a difficult position to be in, but you've got to respect, everybody has entitled to that standard of living. I think it's a reasonable deal. Let's wait and see what the unions say and come back. I'm sure discussions are still ongoing. But again, this is back to the intransigence of the UK government and not giving us additional borrowing abilities or funding the increase in pay because of their poor policy decisions around about inflation.
Completely. Thanks, Paul. Now, I'm also interested. You use the word respect there, and curiously, that's a theme that I'm going to develop with you this evening across a number of the items we're going to discuss. So, thank you for getting ahead of the game again there, as usual. I'm very impressed. But let's move to our next item now, because the SNP has accused Sir Keir Starmer of running scared of the Tories amid a growing backlash over the Labour leader's proposed rule change bid. Labour Party members have expressed their concern after the Labour leadership briefed The Sun on a plan to change the party's constitution to rule out working with progressive parties that support independence, including the SNP, the Greens, Plaid Cymru and the SDLP, while leaving the door open to deals with the Tories, the DUP, UKIP and worse. Responding to the plan, the Welsh Labour member for the Senedd for Blaenau Gwent and a former government minister, Alan Davis MS, tweeted, "What nonsense! Welsh Labour has a cooperation agreement with Plaid, and we have had a coalition with Plaid in the past. It's time for UK Labour to learn from the success of Welsh Labour rather than the failures of Scottish Labour." The former frontbench Labour MSP Neil Findlay tweeted agreement with Davis, and the former Labour government minister and MP John Denham tweeted, "So Welsh Labour will be expelled from UK Labour? There is also the small matter of Labour's relationship with the SDLP." In a thread, the former Labour government special advisor David Clark tweeted, "This seems bonkers at first glance, but when you think about it, it's actually much worse. It suggests that unionism has now supplanted democratic socialism as Labour's core belief system. It would certainly be interesting to see this historic shift debated at conference." The Compass director Neil Lawson warned, "The UK Labour leadership want to deny the legitimate wishes of 50% of Scotland exist rather than deal with the multi-party world people are voting for." Commenting, the SNP Deputy Westminster leader Kirsten Oswald MP said, "Regardless of whether this is a genuine plan, this bungled posturing shows Keir Starmer is running scared of the Tories and is too afraid to challenge their regressive policies head on. You don't beat the Tories by turning into them, but that's exactly what the Labour Party is doing under Starmer's leadership. Instead of offering a real alternative, they are copying the Tories on Brexit, austerity, democracy and their arrogant treatment of Scotland and the devolved nations. Not only is it a sign of weakness, but if this plan was actually implemented via a rule change or more informal approach, it would put the Labour Party in the absurd and unfathomable position of ruling out working with progressive parties like the SNP, Greens, Plaid Cymru and SDLP, while leaving the door open to a deal with the Tories, DUP or UKIP." So, Paul, firstly, the current Labour Party, absurd and unfathomable?
Yeah, as always. I mean, when you look at some of the quotes that you mentioned there, and I've seen these over the weekend as well, it's crazy. It's not thought through. I think the UK Labour Party were almost trying to deny that they had said it, but I think that's, they've put the policy out there to see what the reaction has been, and even from within their own membership, be that Neil Findlay or Welsh Labour, I think it's a ridiculous position to be in. And you've seen the position, particularly since the council elections in Scotland, around about the Scottish Labour Party ruling out coalitions, formal coalitions in their words. not going anywhere else in terms of SNP, but walking into coalitions all over Scotland with the Tories and the Lib Dems in Edinburgh, for example. And it's a ridiculous situation to be in. Even in North Lanarkshire, for example, they're in coalition with the British Unionist Party, the British Unionist Party, a right wing party. So, their position in Scotland is almost becomes laughable. No formal coalitions, no deals. And yet we've seen Labour all over the place in Scotland go into deals with the Tories and Liberal Democrats and so on. So they're all over the place. They're trying to out union the Tories. They're trying to out, and they're kind of stuck in the middle. They try to out union the Tories. They can't out national the SNP, if you like. They're stuck in the middle. They don't have a proposition to put to the Scottish people or the UK electorate either. So their position becomes even more ridiculous, and it highlights that Keir Starmer does not have the intellect or the ability to be a prime minister, and we'll be stuck with the Tories again at the next general election.
Thanks, Paul. I can absolutely understand what you're saying there. Now, I mentioned before, and you mentioned the respect item, and this is, as I say, it's something I want to talk to you about in a couple of items this evening. But I was just wondering, is this story about the Labour Party apparently planning to prohibit cooperation agreements with progressive parties and instead being happy to sign up with the extreme right wing? Is this another symptom of a fundamental lack of respect amongst unionist politicians? By that I mean their point-blank refusal to respect the votes which Scottish voters cast in favour of the Scottish Government, the point-blank denial of our rights of self-determination, and also the continuous attacks on and deprecations of Scottish teachers and doctors and nurses and all sorts of other workers who are criticised by union politicians for failing to meet targets or not doing their work in the way which these unionist politicians want. Is the root cause of this and the root cause of these political parties' problems a fundamental lack of respect for Scottish people and Scottish voters?
Yeah, undoubtedly. Yeah, I think you can see that. As I said, I think when Keir Starmer, a couple over the last 3 or 4 months, has probably had that. Before, Keir Starmer was quoted before and saying if the Scottish people want to have a referendum, they should have the ability to do that. He changed his tact on that. Anna Sarwar also said the same thing. We should respect the right of people. If that's what the people of Scotland say, then they should have the referendum. Of course, they're entitled to the right whether they support independence or not, but not the right of the Scottish people who voted a pro-independence majority of Parliament to have their own referendum in terms of that. And I think you can see that, so there's been a change of tact from the Labour Party on that. And you can almost, when you're in the chamber, you can almost see some Labour politicians, Scottish Labour politicians, are actually embarrassed by their party's stance. You can see it, quite clearly see it, they're embarrassed by the party stance. And privately, they'll tell you that. Publicly, of course they won't. And we have the ridiculous situation. You've got Mark Drakeford, the Welsh Labour Party leader, saying if that's what the Scottish people voted for, then they should be having a referendum. So you actually have the Welsh Labour leader standing up more for the people of Scotland to have that democratic right than the Scottish Labour leader. It's a ridiculous position to be in, and Labour then wonder why they can't recover. And that's exactly the reason why. This will come back and bite Labour in the backside once again in Scotland. They never learn. They never, ever learn.
I'm looking forward to talking to you about this, Paul. Once you're back in the chamber and we see these issues playing out once again, and I'll be sure to talk to you about it. I'm sure in the future.
Yeah.
But let's move on and look at another story now, because the adult disability payment opens for new applications across Scotland from today. The national rollout follows successful pilots in 13 local authority areas, which began in March. It is the 12th and most complex benefit to be delivered by the Scottish Government. It replaces the UK Government's personal independence payments. The benefit provides financial support to people aged between 16 and the state pension age who are disabled, have a long-term health condition, or have a terminal illness. People already receiving the UK Government's personal independence payment and the disability living allowance do not need to apply for the adult disability payment. These existing awards will transfer automatically from the DWP to Social Security Scotland. Cases will transfer in stages starting from this summer, and this process is expected to be completed by the end of 2025. Our Minister for Social Security, Ben McPherson MSP, said the national launch of adult disability payment is a significant milestone in the development of our new social security system that will treat everyone with dignity, fairness and respect. This is the 12th and most complex devolved benefit to be introduced, and once all the awards have been transferred from the DWP, this new payment will be supporting more than 300,000 people. We are offering a range of ways to make an application, including online, by post, over the phone, or face-to-face. Social Security Scotland local delivery teams are also available to provide assistance in communities across the country. In creating our new system, he continued, we have worked extensively and collaboratively with people who will use this service. Their input and their direct experience of the DWP system has significantly informed our policy development and resulted in the number of improvements that we are making to the way in which we are delivering our new service. The Scottish Government is focused on providing a positive and compassionate experience for people applying for and receiving our adult disability payment. In our Scottish system, no one will be subject to DWP-style assessments or degrading functional examinations, and we will never use the private sector to carry out health examinations. So, Paul, Moira Tasker, the Chief Exec of Inclusion Scotland, said the adult disability payment ushers in further progress towards upholding the values of dignity and respect in Scottish society, which she says were entirely lacking in the Department of Work and Pensions approach to disability benefits. As I say, I've been reflecting a little bit on respect in politics and wider society a bit today. Do you think, did the DWP-style assessments and their degrading functional examinations performed by underqualified private sector contractors, and those aspects were keystones of the personal independence payment schemes, do they indicate that the politicians who dreamt up that scheme, and perhaps the Westminster civil servants who designed the processes, does that indicate that they did not have sufficient or indeed any respect for the citizens who they were supposed to be helping?
Yeah, Andrew, I sit in the Social Justice Committee at the Parliament, Social Security Committee at the Parliament, so we've had extensive evidence sessions and discussions around about this subject, and I think you're right. I mean, there is a key difference in around about how this has been implemented, how people are treated within the system, in terms of that. I think in terms of the physical examinations and so on, that was a political discussion. I think probably decision around about that, because we've seen, I think it was Sheila Braverman come out and talked around about during the Tory leadership, saying that we should be getting tougher on disability payments and welfare payments and in general, and that that was a scary prospect in terms of that. We heard what Rishi Sunak said in terms of we should be getting tougher on welfare benefits and so on. I don't understand what they mean by tougher. The system is already degrading to people who already claim through that. The Scottish Government approach is completely different. We had a meeting last week talking with the Social Security local delivery teams, who have been absolutely fantastic in getting and working with the communities in terms of that and offering the face-to-face meetings that you mentioned. So there's a completely different approach to this. Obviously, it'll need monitored over the next few months and years, and the Social Security Committee will be looking at that. But the first few steps and the feedback we've got from groups who are involved, it's a major sea change in terms. Now, I'm proud to be part of a Scottish Government, a Scottish Parliament offers that different approach and respects people who require the disability payments. Nobody wants to do that, but they need to do that, and I'm glad and I'm proud to be part, as I said, of a Parliament, a government that supports that and gives people their dignity back, which they didn't have under the PIP system.
Absolutely. Thanks, Paul. I'm very grateful to you for that. I'm sure the respect agenda is something that we will come back to in future programmes as we discuss both Westminster policies and Holyrood policies too. But let's move on to our next item now, because Pakistan's government has appealed for international help to tackle a flooding emergency that has killed more than 1,000 people and which threatens to leave a third of the country, an area roughly the size of the whole of the UK, underwater. The Foreign Minister, Bilalwal Bhutto Zardari, said on Sunday night that floods brought on by weeks of extreme monsoon rainfall and melting glaciers would worsen Pakistan's already dire economic situation and that financial aid was needed. He said, going forward, I would expect not only the International Monetary Fund, but the international community and international agencies to truly grasp the level of devastation. He continued, I haven't seen destruction on this scale. I find it very difficult to put it into words. It is overwhelming. Many crops that provided much of the population's livelihoods and food had been wiped out, he added. Pakistan is facing high inflation, a depreciating currency, and a current account deficit. And Mr. Bhutto Zardari said he hoped the flooding emergency would persuade the IMF's board this week to release $1.2 billion as part of the seventh and eighth tranches of a bailout program for Pakistan. The first foreign aid was beginning to trickle into Pakistan on Monday on flights from Turkey and the UAE, the start of a huge relief operation to alleviate a disaster that has affected around 33 million people and has left swathes of the country inundated. At least 1,061 people have now died in the deluges, and that toll is set to rise further, with many communities in the mountainous northern regions cut off by flood-swollen rivers that washed away roads and bridges. The Army's helicopters were struggling to pluck people to safety in the north, where steep hills and valleys make for treacherous flying conditions. Many rivers in the area, a picturesque tourist destination, have burst their banks, demolishing scores of buildings, including a 150-room hotel that crumbled into the raging torrent. It came as the country's climate minister warned that one-third of Pakistan could soon be underwater by the time this year's monster monsoon has receded. So, Paul, firstly, the last DEC appeal following catastrophic floods in Pakistan was 10 years ago. Does the impact of these recent floods suggest that not enough has been done in the past 10 years, or that the climate situation in Pakistan is, or in addition, is also getting worse?
Yeah, yes to both. It's 10 months now since COP26, where we've seen governments getting a chance to come together to tackle issues such as, what's happening in Pakistan. We're going to see more extreme monsoons. We're going to see more extreme droughts in terms of that. And it is going to impact on countries in different ways. We're talking about 33 million people being impacted by the flooding directly. If you look at the across the world, China is going through a drought. The US is going through a drought. So these extremes now are becoming the norm in terms of this. So I think part of the failure and part of the challenge now for COP is actually recognising this is going to be the norm going forward. And how do we deal with that and mitigate it? But two, in terms of what's going to happen financially, governments will need that additional support, but particularly in the global south, that has to be recognised. We need to do more for the next COP meeting to recognise this. But these extreme weather conditions are going to continue to worsen over that period of time. We just have to look at the last 10 months and see what's happened. So we need to be looking at that. And I think governments, especially Western governments, need to be looking to do more to support other, the likes of Pakistan and other countries in terms of this, because this is going to become the norm. And actually people moving from different parts of the world, whether it's due to monsoons or droughts, I think will hasten, quite a bit in the next number of years, because places will become inhabitable either due to floods or due to extreme drought conditions. So this is with us. We need to be doing more to support countries to either mitigate, but we have to then realise some of these issues are going to be too late to mitigate. How do we finance and support countries that need that support? Because people will either drown or die, heat exhaustion or whatever. So there needs to be more to be done. And I think just looking at the last 10 months has highlighted where the heavy impact that climate change is having a lot quicker than even some scientists have been predicting.
Thanks, Paul. And actually, to develop the point you were just making and look at this in a little bit more detail, Sindh province in Pakistan's southeast and Baluchistan in the southwest are the two most affected provinces. More than 500,000 livestock have been killed, nearly all of them in Baluchistan, while damage to nearly 3,000 kilometres of roads and 129 bridges has impeded movement around the flood-affected areas. The main supply route from the port city of Karachi has been cut for more than a week after the bridge linking it to Baluchistan was swept away, while dozens of small dams in the province have been overwhelmed. So to protect people properly for the future, it's going to need significant investment and significant delivery of infrastructure, isn't it?
Yeah, without a doubt, and I think that that's almost the issue. if you even looked at Pakistan and what it would need to invest, even just to repair after this latest flood, it's going to be done into you said 1.2 billion. You'll be talking into hundreds of billions of pounds, and we need to look about how we can create that and look at how to support that over the next number of years. Again, because if not, these events will happen more and more and more. And if we don't prepare and have the infrastructure in each of these countries to support that, the impact will worsen each and every time this happens. And we often hear these events were maybe 1 in 20 or 1 in 30 or 1 in 50 year events. They're now these events now are becoming to 1 in 5 years. It's going to happen much more. And so collectively, the world needs to do more, but especially the relatively prosperous North needs to be looking at what we can do to support the global South, because if not, the problems will come back and it'll hit all the world, not just the global South.
Thanks, Paul. Let's move on to another story now this evening, because NASA has had to postpone the launch of its Artemis 1 moon rocket mission today because of an unexpected engine issue. The rocket's engine didn't get to the high accuracy temperature that they were looking for, the launch control communicator Daryl Neal said of engineers' efforts to condition the engine for launch. Officials have now scheduled another launch attempt for the 2nd of September. The giant Space Launch System rocket had been scheduled to take off from NASA's Cape Canaveral, Florida complex at 8:33 a.m. Eastern Time. That's 1:33 in the afternoon UK time, atop an unmanned Orion spacecraft that is designed to carry up to 6 astronauts to the moon and beyond. The postponement was announced shortly after that scheduled departure. The 1.3 million mile Artemis 1 test mission, which would have lasted for 42 days, is aiming to take the Orion vehicle 40,000 miles past the far side of the moon, departing from the same facility that staged the Apollo lunar missions half a century ago. So, Paul, the 98-metre-high Space Launch System is the most powerful rocket NASA has ever built, and in this crucial testing phase it will fly further than any spacecraft built for humans, 40,000 miles past the far side of the moon, 280,000 miles from Earth. The vehicle's 8.8 million pounds of thrust at launch is 13% more powerful than the Space Shuttle and 15% greater than the Saturn V rocket that was used on the previous Apollo missions. So with numbers like that, does this indicate that perhaps NASA maybe has its mojo back?
Probably, yeah. I think when you look at the investment into it in terms of what they're trying to do, you've heard it being linked to, could this mean there could be life on Mars and so on. So it's obviously had its mojo back. And I don't think you can doubt sometimes the benefits of space exploration. My big issue at the moment is in terms of how much money is this costing, and when we're facing the biggest crisis in terms of cost of living, and this impacts on obviously all over the world in the States and so on. The United States has massive rates of homelessness at the moment. So I fail to see where this kind of fits in terms of priorities. So yes, in terms of its mojo, without a doubt. In terms of its priorities, I really struggle to see why now, and particularly in terms of where we are at this time, it could be doing a lot more in terms of supporting the most vulnerable people in the States, of which there are millions. I really feel to struggle to see that, and I'm sorry if anybody's listening who's obviously got an interest in that, but I just think at this stage it's all about priorities.
That's a very good point, Paul. And if I can expand on that a little bit with you, writing over the weekend, The Economist is saying that they're a bit underwhelmed by the programme, saying that it's using old technology, and also pointing out that in their view, it's overspending enormously on the way. And so probably the counter argument that the Economist would put forward would be that space exploration should instead be handed over to the richest people on the planet, effectively outsourced to Elon Musk and the like, and Richard Branson and the like. Do you think that that's an appropriate way forward?
I think we would have to be very careful, because you'd have to see what the motives would be of the likes of Elon Musk and Richard Branson, who obviously have looked at it in terms of the commercial interests. In terms of that, I think there would be a real disconnect in terms of what this mission that NASA are proposing at the moment, where you would get the commercial benefits for the likes of Elon Musk or Richard Branson. I think it would probably require more discussion in terms of that. They would obviously look for a rate of return. But in terms of looking at the budget, NASA spends billions of pounds each year on it could be doing a lot more. In terms of we should be looking at I mean it comes back to the previous article in terms of how do you mitigate issues around about the flooding or in America's been experiencing drought. We should be spending money on how do we negate drought in various and massive parts of America in terms of how do they feed their own population. We should be looking at that rather than at this stage looking at and about can we find life on Mars at some stage, which has been discussed for 50, 60, 70 years. So it's all about priorities. It's one that merits more debate, but at this stage, I can't see it takes priority over some of the major issues that we're experiencing at the moment. And I say the economists are obviously saying that as well. Yeah, and I think it needs to take a much broader look. Is it a case of trying to feed America's ego in terms of space travel? I think you've always had that issue, and if it is going to be, I think looking at this issue, it should be done in conjunction. And they used to have the International Space Program, which now Russia has withdrawn. So you'll have both Russia and America looking at the same thing. They should be working together on it. That looks highly likely at this stage. So yeah, it's a distraction, I think, for me in terms of that. So where there's
Thanks.
many more problems that could be looked at, and these funding could be looked at much more better at this stage.
Thanks, Paul. As you say, collaboration and prioritisation are probably more the order of the day at the moment. But let's come back to Scotland for our next item, because our Health Secretary, Humza Yousaf MSP, has praised the work of the Scottish Trauma Network as it completes its first year of operation. Trauma remains the fourth leading cause of death in Western countries and the leading cause of death for people under the age of 40. Each year in Scotland, around 4,000 people are seriously injured, with around 800 to 1,000 cases being defined as having major trauma. The Scottish Trauma Network, made up of specialist centres in Aberdeen, Dundee, Glasgow and Edinburgh, and linked through the Scottish Ambulance Service, aims to save lives and give life back. The network ensures that seriously injured people get the best possible care and an enhanced chance of recovery wherever their location. Each major trauma centre has wide-ranging knowledge and expertise that can now manage multiple specialist patient needs at the earliest possible opportunity, improving the chances of saving lives and giving life back. In the first year since the network became fully linked up and operational, more than 3,800 patients have been treated at the centres, with 180 of those being children under the age of 16. Through the Scottish Ambulance Service, the Trauma Network supports emergency calls from patients spread across 30,000 square miles of land, busy city centres to the most rural and remote spots in our Highlands and Islands. The first trauma centres were opened in 2018, and the final two opened in August 2021. Since 2018, the Scottish Government has committed over £112 million to the Scottish Trauma Network, with over £40 million committed in 2022-23 alone. Humza Yousaf, during a visit to the major trauma centre at the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh, which opened last year, said the network was providing a vital role in saving and rebuilding lives. Mr Yousaf said, the Scottish Trauma Network is now fully joined up and will continue to provide better outcomes than ever for our most severely injured patients. So, Paul, in looking at the annual report for the Scottish Trauma Network from last year, I was struck between the strong messages of collaboration between national and local resources. It's a national network joined up by the Scottish Ambulance Service and by data services as well, but it provides it through a network of local resources, and those local resources are configured and delivered in the way that is best suits the local area. So, thinking a little bit more broadly about the design and implementation of policy by the Scottish Government, is this collaboration between national and local resources and skills, is this a model which could be used elsewhere in other policy settings?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, as you know, as a Lothians-based MSP, we have meetings with NHS Lothian on a regular basis, every month to 6 weeks, sort of thing. So, this has been raised in the meetings we've had with them. It has been a success, and I think you're right that it's that national objective and that national imperative. But it's looking about how that can be implemented on a local basis, and I think that's worked really well. So it's what services are available, and I think with trauma injuries, if you like, the quicker these can be dealt with, I think the most important thing, it improves people's health a lot quicker. But it also, I think it saves money in the longer run because it's an issue of the ongoing issues that the patient has. They'll often end up back in hospital with various issues. So I think the quicker we can deal with patients who have suffered trauma injuries, the better it is for their health, most importantly. But in terms of the cost to the National Health Service, I think there is, that is very clearly comes through. But it is that national imperative, these national policies, in terms of that working as best we can on a local basis. So yeah, I think there is a model to look at that, how we can make sure we do that. And of course, you get the main centres of population in Aberdeen, Dundee, Glasgow, Edinburgh, and so on. So yeah, I think there is a model to learn from that. But I think a very clear success story in terms of that, and I'm glad that the Scottish Government continues to support that.
Great, thanks, Paul. That's useful insight, in particular, as you say, as an MSP representing a constituency that's covered by the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh, who we touched on there. But
Yeah.
let's move to another story in Scotland, because the next stage in making Scotland a global leader in sustainable and regenerative agriculture has been launched. People are being urged to take part in a consultation on the Scottish Government's forthcoming agriculture bill. The Scottish Government Climate Change Plan has already committed to reducing agricultural emissions by 31% by 2032. The Rural Affairs Secretary, Vary Gudgeon, said, "We are supporting our farmers, crofters and land managers to produce more high quality and sustainable food, as well as ensuring our food system is more resilient. The fact is that high quality food production is very much part of meeting our net zero targets and dealing with the twin crises of climate change and biodiversity loss." She continued, "I would urge people from all walks of life to get involved and make their views known. These issues affect us all." So, Paul, the new agriculture bill aims to enable flexibility whilst ensuring that Scotland's people are able to live and work sustainably on our land. This framework is intended to deliver key outcomes, including high quality food production, climate mitigation and adaptation, nature restoration, and wider rural development. Now, it struck me that perhaps apart from nature restoration, the three other key outcomes that I've just listed have become significantly more difficult in the past 3 or 4 years. Now, so whilst these issues are undoubtedly interlinked, is there a risk here that seeking to cover all of them in a single piece of legislation is perhaps biting off too much that the Scottish Government will be able to chew successfully?
I think, since being elected, Andrew, I've engaged quite extensively with the local NFU in East Lothian, and I think what becomes clear is that all these issues are interlinked. And I think one of the overriding things is the Scottish Government's climate change plan is looking to reduce agricultural emissions by 31% by 2032. So that's 10 years away. That's not a long time to reduce that. So I think, the ambition, I think, of the bill, I think, is incredibly important. It comes at an incredibly challenging time for farmers in terms of feed prices and so on, weather conditions that aren't helping them in terms of that. So all these issues, I think, are interlinked, and they all need to succeed to make sure that we reach that climate change plan target of 31%. So I think the farmers, I think that we're kind of calling it today for more policy discussions and development. I think you'll get the position, depending on the consultation, that may feed into policy decisions that support what we're looking for. In this regard, I think the key themes, I think, are spot on. But I think in terms of how we then develop policy over the next 2 3 years is incredibly important to make sure that we support farmers and doing what they need to do. Particularly again post Brexit, that hasn't helped the farmer situation either in terms of that. And as you said, it's not just climate change; it's biodiversity. So how do we support the biodiversity emergency as well? So it's tough. It's incredibly tough for farmers just now. They are going through that transition, I think, at the moment, and probably the toughest times that they've faced for a long period of time. So I'm looking forward to engaging with our local NFU and continuing engaging with the local NFU in terms of that and how we can try and take these issues forward and make sure that farming continues to thrive in Scotland. It's a major employer in my constituency, as it is in many other constituencies, and they're doing their best to try and how they can move together in terms of getting that climate change, tackling biodiversity, uh, all whilst continue to try and trade successfully in that regard. So they've got a big part to play. This is a good step forward. we need more policy discussions and engaging with the farmers in that regard. But it's a good start. It's a good start.
Thanks, Paul. And actually, for our next item, there's a strong element of it that relates to life in rural parts of Scotland and the support and investment that's required. Because the Transport Minister, Jenny Gilruth, has welcomed a major milestone of Scottish Government investment in securing a long term solution to the Rest and Be Thankful. Transport Scotland has announced the intention to appoint Atkins WSP joint venture to progress design and development work for the route through Glencroe. The contract represents £25 million of Scottish Government investment, an estimate of the overall contract value for undertaking the design, promotion, procurement, and construction supervision of medium and long term solutions. Commenting, the Minister for Transport said, "It is clear that the Rest and Be Thankful needs an urgent solution, which will bring certainty to the lives of those directly impacted when the A83 is cut off. This investment from the Scottish Government represents a significant milestone because it will allow the vital design work needed to commence at pace." A preferred route corridor for the permanent solution was announced in March 2021. There is now a need to complete the necessary engineering and environmental assessments and statutory processes to allow any land to be acquired to facilitate the construction. The works are projected to cost around £25 million and will take approximately 7 to 10 years to complete, depending on the final option chosen. So, Paul, the opposite side of the country to East Lothian, but in 2020, the A83 at the Rest and Be Thankful was closed for a total of 200 days. And between 2007 and the beginning of this year, the Scottish Government has spent £87 million on the entirety of the A83, and another £1.3 million being awarded to an engineering firm in January to begin to undertake preliminary ground investigations for the new stretch of road. So the timescales and the amounts of money still seem a little bit curious to me. And in terms of providing a solution to the people of Kintyre and Argyll, is a plan that's going to take approximately 7 to 10 years to complete. Is that good enough?
I know how much that means to colleagues, and Jenny Minton, my colleague in Argyll and Bute, has raised this on a number of occasions. I've driven past there. I'm fortunate enough not to have been cut off or been diverted, but you can obviously see by driving past it, it's in a very precarious position. Climate change, we've talked about before, is only going to make the situation even worse and exacerbate heavy rainfall and so on, which obviously makes the problem worse. So what's clear now is we need to move on this as quickly as we can and have that situation. I know they're talking around about springtime, 2023, about having some kind of preferred solution. So we need to move on to that and start to do that as quickly as possible. By its very nature, I think the solution it will take that time just because of where it is, its location. There's never going to be an easy solution to this in terms of that. So I'm glad we've moved on this. Hopefully we'll get the preferred option, if you like, by spring 2023, and we need to then start to moving and getting people in to start the work as soon as, because it will continue, and there's no doubt it'll still continue to have issues going forward in that period of time. So the quicker we get a solution identified, the quicker we get the work done in that, then the better for the people of the area.
Thanks, Paul. And thinking very briefly about the politics of this, in a sense, this investment in the A83 comes against the backdrop of calls for much greater investment in the A87 between Dumfries and Stranraer, and the A96 between Inverness and Aberdeen. Now, and obviously, for the Scottish Government, which includes the Green Party in the government, this is a difficult balancing act to strike. But local people certainly have been calling for improvements to the infrastructure, and indeed the investment in the A83 is to bring the infrastructure back to a basic standard where it's even open. Do you think is the Scottish Government able to move ahead with investments of this type as quickly and as efficiently as local people are requesting?
I think you obviously mentioned about the agreement with the Greens, and I think to be honest, they'll be pragmatic and realise the options around about the 83 and some of the other roads. I would agree, obviously, with the general policy directions in terms of trying to encourage people to invest in public transport and so on, and that still needs to be continued to do, and active transport and so on. The A83 is needing done, because it's impacting the economy, it's impacting people's lives in the area, and I think that's by that there is a strong economic case. There's a strong case around about the general amenity of the people in the area in terms of this. I think each roadwork improvements I think will be looked at as in terms of that, in terms of its climate change impact and so on. And I know that's written into the agreement with the Greens, but in this one, I think it needs to move on as quickly as possible because I said the impact it has on business, the impact in particular about tourism as well, but also the impact on the general amenities of people who sometimes have to travel hours just to get home. That's it can't go on. It's been needed and invested in for decades. And I'm glad Scottish Government are doing something about it now.
Thanks, Paul. That's a very useful insight. Thank you. I'm very grateful to you. However, unfortunately, that is all the time that we have this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. Please help us to continue to make these programmes, to continue to develop the station and to make new programmes for you. To everyone who has already donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a subscriber and a supporter of Broadcasting Scotland. We have set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers because that would enable us to employ staff to make more programmes. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, either behind the scenes or in any other way that helps our station, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot. My apologies for that. Please send us a message at our website, which is www.broadcastingscotland.scot. You'll also find us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot, on Facebook by searching for Broadcasting Scotland, and when you're watching us on YouTube, please, it would be great if you would like and subscribe to Broadcasting Scotland on that platform. Meantime, we will be here again tomorrow evening with the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please tune in and join us again then. And that's the way it is at very nearly Scotland at 8. I'd like to thank everyone who has been watching this evening, and I'd like to give a very special thanks to our very special guest, Paul McLennan, MSP. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Andrew. Always enjoyable. Always enjoy the discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us. Now, I'm reminded that on this day in 1930, the remote island of St Kilda, lying in the Atlantic to the west of the Western Isles, was evacuated. In the kirk on the island, a Bible remains open at the Book of Exodus, just as the community left it 92 years ago. I'm thinking of the Gillises, the McKinnons, the McQueens, the Fergusons and the MacDonalds, who left on HMS Harebell, never to return to their homes. I hope that you have a very peaceful evening. Bye-bye.